The church parking lot was packed long before the service started. Rain tapped softly against the windows while people dressed in black walked through the front doors in silence. Inside, the room smelled like coffee, flowers, and old wood polish. At the front sat pictures of Tom through the years, younger photos from before the building, before the fighting, before everything got complicated. Ron stood near the hallway entrance fixing his tie with shaky hands. He pulled Alex aside and spoke quietly. "Alex, if people ask why David and Rachel aren't here at Tom's funeral, don't mention the divorce. Don't mention the restraining order." Alex looked uncomfortable for a second before nodding. "I'll just say they need prayers." Ron exhaled slowly. "Yeah, just say that." Ron grabbed the wall for balance before walking toward the chapel doors. A few minutes later, Henry stepped inside with Todd and looked around the room. Henry whispered, "Why are we even here? I thought Will hated him, and we support David and Rachel." Todd kept his voice calm. "We're not here for Tom, we're here for Will." Henry crossed his arms. "Still feels weird." Todd looked toward the back doors. "I asked David and Rachel if it was okay. They said yes. Nobody's here to pick sides, we're just supporting Will, that's it." Henry nodded a little, though he still didn't look convinced. People kept turning toward the entrance every few minutes, expecting David or Rachel to walk in. But they never did. The empty seats near the front became impossible not to notice. Whispers slowly spread through the room. "Maybe they're coming late. Maybe they couldn't handle it. Maybe the rumors are true." Near the second row sat Will in his wheelchair, holding his stuffed bear tightly against his chest. He stared at the floor the entire time people entered. Some residents from the building awkwardly waved at him. Will only gave small nods back. Henry leaned down beside him quietly. "You okay?" Will didn't answer at first. Then he typed slowly onto his device. "He hurt people, but I still remember the good stuff too." Henry read the screen and stayed quiet. Will typed again. "I don't know what I am supposed to feel today." Todd gently rested a hand on Will's shoulder. "You don't gotta figure it out today." At the front of the chapel, the pastor cleared his throat as the room slowly fell silent. And for the first time all morning, the reality hit everyone. Tom was really gone. The chapel went quiet as the pastor stepped up to the front. Ron looked out over the room, his hands resting on the edge of the pulpit. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then his voice cracked slightly. "My son, wait, before I start this service I need to say something." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ron swallowed hard. "Let me tell you why my wife and my other son aren't here this morning." The room tensed. "I carried things for years that I should have spoken about, things I buried because I was afraid of how I would look." He looked down at the pulpit like he couldn't meet anyone's eyes. "I had demons I didn't know I had, and I hid the truth about my family." A quiet murmur ran through the chapel. Will slowly lifted his head, watching closely now. Ron continued, voice heavier. "Tom had a twin brother, Nate." A few people blinked in confusion. "He was only 3 years old when he passed away." The air in the room felt colder. Ron's hands tightened. "After that, I convinced Rachel to put Tom into a group home. I told myself it was what was best, but I wasn't honest about why I really made that choice." Across the aisle, Henry leaned forward slightly, frowning. Todd stayed still, watching Ron carefully. Ron's voice started to shake more. "Before any of you came here, I told people in my life to lie for me, to protect me, to make me look like I was doing the right thing." He paused. "But I've lied for years, and it hasn't just hurt people around me, it's made me someone I don't even recognize anymore." Silence filled the chapel completely now. Ron looked up at last. "That makes me look bad to you, to myself, and to God." His voice broke on the last word. "So I'm asking for forgiveness, not because I deserve it but because I can't carry this anymore." He stepped back from the pulpit slightly. And in the heavy quiet that followed, no one knew whether this was part of the funeral or the beginning of something that would change everything they thought they knew about Tom's life. The words hung in the chapel like a weight no one could shake. Will stared at his tablet, his jaw tightening as he read what he had just typed. "What, why, Dad?" he said. "Fishing, Dad, can he do that?" The message wasn't sent out loud, but it might as well have been. his grip on the device tightened. Beside him, Todd leaned in quickly and read the screen. His expression stayed calm but firm. "Will's calm down." Will's eyes flashed with anger and confusion, as everything in the room had suddenly become too loud, even though no one was speaking directly to him. On the pulpit, the pastor was still standing there in silence after his confession, the weight of it still settling over the room. Henry glanced over from a few seats away, noticing Will's reaction and shifting forward slightly, unsure whether to step in. "Will," Henry started quietly but didn't finish the sentence. Will's hands shook slightly as he looked back at the tablet. For a second it looked like he was about to type again, something sharper, something he couldn't take back. Instead he pressed the power button. The screen went black. He shoved the tablet down onto his lap and turned his head away from everyone, refusing to look at the front of the room anymore. His breathing was heavier now, but he stayed silent. Todd didn't push him, he just stayed close, steady, watching the front as the funeral tried to continue, while everything underneath it quietly started to unravel. The tension in the chapel hadn't settled yet. The pastor's confession still lingered in people's faces, confusion, shock, and discomfort spreading through the rows. Todd leaned slightly toward Henry, keeping his voice low. "Henry, we're going, I'm driving you." Henry looked surprised. "Now?" Todd nodded once. This isn't helping him stay here right now. A few seats away, Will still had his head turned away from the front, his tablet now powered off on his lap. His shoulders were tense, like he was trying to hold himself together without letting anyone see it crack. Todd stepped closer to him. "Will, are you sure you want to go?" Will didn't answer right away. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes flicked toward Todd, then toward Henry, then briefly toward the front of the chapel where everything still felt unstable. Then he looked back down at his lap. And this time he gave a small, clear nod. "Yes." It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was final. Todd softened his voice. "Okay, then we're leaving together, no pressure, no questions." Henry stood up quietly too, watching Will carefully. "I'm with you." Will looked up again, a little slower this time, like he was making sure he wasn't being rushed or pushed. The room behind them continued without them, the pastor still at the front, people still sitting in uncomfortable silence, but for Will the decision had already been made. Todd gently placed a hand near Will's wheelchair handles. "All right, let's get you out of here." Outside the chapel doors, the air felt colder and quieter, like the building had sealed everything heavy inside and left the rest of the world untouched. Will had his tablet back on. His fingers moved quickly across the screen. "Sorry I couldn't hear his lies. Tom told me stuff. I couldn't sit there and hear Ron's side." He paused, then added another line. Todd read it carefully beside him. Todd exhaled slowly. "I get it, I know you're 28, Will, but I saw you about to go there." Will didn't look up right away. He typed again, faster this time. "I know that why I turned this off." Behind them, Henry shook his head slightly, still processing everything that had just happened inside. "We'll never turn that off," Henry muttered half to himself. Todd didn't look back at him, his focus stayed on Will. "That's exactly why I knew we needed to leave." Will's fingers stopped midair. He slowly turned the screen slightly toward Todd. "You knew how?" Todd nodded once, steady. "I know your body language. For 28 years I've been your father." That sentence landed heavier than anything said inside the chapel. Will looked up at him, finally fully meeting his eyes. Henry went quiet behind them. For a moment, even the street noise outside felt distant, like the world had narrowed down to just that conversation, between frustration, understanding, and something deeper neither of them had fully named out loud yet. Will lowered his gaze again and typed slowly, like each word had to be pulled out of somewhere heavy inside him. "I still feel mad about what Tom did to me and sad that he's gone at the same time. When will it get better, Dad?" He held the tablet up so Todd could read it. Todd didn't rush his answer, he stayed beside Will, steady and calm. "It doesn't switch off quickly," Todd said quietly. "Not anger, not grief, especially not when both are happening at the same time." Will's hands tightened slightly around the tablet. Todd continued, softer now. "You don't have to pick one feeling, you can have both, that's normal." Behind them, Henry stood a little apart, watching but not interrupting. The chapel doors were still open behind him, people slowly filtering out, but he stayed focused on Will. Todd glanced down at the message again. "When it gets better," he repeated gently, "it won't be a moment where everything disappears. It'll be more like one day you notice it hurts a little less sharply, then a bit less often." He looked at Will properly now. "But it takes time, and you don't go through it alone." Will didn't respond straight away. His fingers hovered over the tablet, but he didn't type anything else yet. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was steady, like something holding him in place so he didn't have to fall through it. Henry shifted his weight near the steps, glancing back toward the chapel doors that were slowly emptying out. "Can we go home?" Henry asked quietly. Todd nodded once, already looking toward the car. "Yeah," Todd said, "we can go." He turned slightly toward Will, who was still holding his tablet tightly. Todd's voice softened, "We're heading out now." Will's fingers moved again, slower this time, like they were heavier than before. "I need this pain to stop." He showed it without looking up. Todd read it, then didn't rush to respond. He crouched slightly so he was closer to Will's level. "I know," Todd said quietly, "I hear you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I can't promise it stops right away. What I can promise is you won't sit in it alone." Henry stepped closer, more gentle now than before. "We're coming with you, Will." The wind moved through the steps outside, carrying the distant sound of people leaving the funeral behind them. Todd placed a steady hand near the wheelchair handles, not pushing yet, just there. "One step at a time," he said, "let's just get you home first." The drive back was quiet at first, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, just tired. Henry broke it first when the car pulled into the parking lot. "Happy meal," he said, trying to lift the mood a little as they turned toward the glowing sign of McDonald's. Todd glanced over the steering wheel. "You're 12, Todd asked flatly. Henry shrugged. "I know." Todd let out a small breath through his nose, half exasperated, half amused, but didn't argue further. He looked in the rearview mirror toward Will, who had stayed quiet the whole ride, leaning back in his chair, exhausted from everything that had happened. "What about you, Will?" Todd asked gently. Henry answered before Will could. "He is asleep." Todd's eyes softened slightly. "Don't wake him." He turned the wheel into the drive-thru lane. "I'll order his favorite," Todd said. "Try and cheer him up a bit." He glanced at Henry, 2 cheeseburgers and a strawberry milkshake. Henry nodded. "I'll get that too, I guess." The car rolled forward slowly in line, headlights reflecting off the wet pavement. Inside the back seat, Will stayed still, finally quiet in a way that wasn't anger or typing or trying to process everything at once, just rest. And for the first time that day, nobody asked him to explain anything. The drive-thru line crept forward under the bright McDonald's lights, rain streaking across the windshield in thin lines. Henry shifted in his seat, still thinking about everything that had happened at the funeral. "Dad," he said quietly, using it without thinking. Todd didn't correct him this time, he just waited. Henry frowned toward the back seat where Will was still resting, worn out and silent. "Why is Will so devastated that Tom's dead?" Henry asked, even though they hated each other so much. Todd kept his eyes on the line moving ahead. "It's not always that simple," he said. He tapped the steering wheel lightly, choosing his words. "People can be angry at someone and still be attached to them, or hurt by them and still feel loss when they're gone." Henry frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't have to," Todd replied. "Grief doesn't ask permission or logic." He glanced briefly in the mirror again. "Sometimes the strongest feelings come from complicated relationships, especially ones that weren't clean or finished properly." Henry looked down at his hands. "So he's mad and sad." Todd nodded once. "Exactly." A pause. "And right now," Todd added, "he doesn't need to sort it out, he just needs time to feel it without being alone in it." The car moved forward again in the line, speakers crackling ahead as the order window came closer. Behind them, Will stayed quiet, still resting, carrying more inside him than he had words for. The car rolled forward slowly in the McDonald's line, engine humming softly while rain tapped the roof. In the back seat, Will suddenly lifted his tablet again, His fingers moved fast like he needed the words out before he could rethink them. Love him. Todd glanced up in the rearview mirror. Huh, he said gently, like friends. Will's hands tightened slightly. He typed again, clearer this time. Romantic. The car went quiet. Henry turned in his seat, surprised, trying to process it. So, when in the hospital when he called you a fa, Henry started, then stopped himself, uncomfortable. We'll cut in quickly, typing harder now. Yes, please drop it and don't tell Mom, please, I didn't want you to know. The sentence landed heavily in the small space of the car. Todd didn't react immediately. He kept his hands steady on the wheel, giving himself a moment before speaking. Will, he said calmly, I hear you. Henry looked between them, unsure what to say now. Todd's voice stayed even, not angry, not shocked, just grounded. We're not going to tell your mum anything like this right now. That's not something we're going to spread. A pause. But we are going to talk about it properly later, not in a moving car, not in the middle of everything today. He glanced back at Will in the mirror again. You're safe and nothing you said changes that. Henry slowly turned back around, quieter now. The car inched forward toward the speaker, but the mood had shifted, no longer about food or jokes but something more complicated and carefully held until it could be understood properly. Will's fingers slowed on the tablet. He stared at the screen for a moment, then typed again. Sorry, not give a full picture. He held it up. Todd read it carefully, then nodded slightly. Okay, Todd said gently, thanks for saying that. He didn't rush to fill the silence. That actually helps, he added, because it means you're trying to be honest even when it's messy. In the front seat, Henry stayed quiet now, watching the rain blur across the window. Todd kept his tone steady. We don't need the full picture all at once, Will, not today, not in a car, not after everything that just happened. A pause. But we will come back to it when you're ready, properly, step by step. He glanced at Will in the mirror again. And you don't have to apologize for how it came out. You're allowed to get it wrong while you're figuring it out. The line at the McDonald's speaker moved forward slowly, bright menu lights reflecting off the wet road. Inside the back seat, Will stayed still for a moment, tablet resting in his hands. Not corrected, not judged, just heard. The front door closed behind them with a dull click, cutting off the sound of the rain outside. Inside the house, the living room was already occupied. Bate was sitting on the couch. Rachel was nearby, watching quietly. David looked up first as they walked in. How was it? David asked. Henry hesitated. He started, unsure how to even compress the day into one word. Todd answered for him, voice calm but direct. Henry, shut up. Everyone paused. Todd continued, keeping it simple but serious. Will had a difficult moment at the funeral. Ron made a public confession. Will felt overwhelmed and said Ron was sadfishing, but he was reacting emotionally. Henry shifted awkwardly, looking down. David frowned slightly, sadfishing. Before anyone could explain further, Henry quickly tried to escape the tension. Can I eat in my room? He asked. Todd nodded without much thought. Yeah, you can. Bate immediately frowned. No, he can't, Todd, you know the rules, he doesn't get to just go isolate himself like that. The room tightened again. David looked between them, picking up on the mood more than the words. You three are hiding something, David said quietly. No one answered right away. The silence stretched long enough that it became obvious there was more beneath what had been said, and even more beneath what hadn't. The living room went quiet in a different way now, sharper, more focused. Rachel leaned forward slightly, her voice controlled but uneasy. How would Will know that Ron would do that? She asked. Only our family would know that, and Will isn't family, so how would he know that? The question landed in the middle of the room and stayed there. Bate turned her attention toward the hallway. Will, she called gently but firmly, can you explain? From nearby, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Todd stepped slightly forward like he was ready to intervene if needed, but he didn't speak yet. Henry looked uncomfortable, eyes flicking toward where Will was. The room waited. A few seconds later, Will was brought into focus by the silence. Whether he had just walked in or was already there and being noticed now, everything paused around him. All eyes were on him now. Bate softened her tone a little. Will, just tell us what happened, in your words. Todd stayed close but didn't interrupt. He gave Will space. This was no longer about explaining others. It was about whether Will felt safe enough to explain himself at all. That sentence would hit a room like a dropped glass. Will typed it out and held the tablet up. WTF Henry, Tom and I were in a romantic relationship. For a second nobody reacted at all, like the meaning hadn't fully landed yet. Then the silence changed. Henry froze completely, staring at the screen as he'd misread it. Rachel went still, her expression tightening as she processed it. Bate blinked once slowly then looked toward Todd. David straightened slightly, confusion and shock mixing in his face. Todd stepped forward immediately, not angry, not reactive, just steady, moving the situation back toward control. Okay, Todd said firmly but calmly, we're going to slow this down. He looked at Will. Will put the tablet down for a second. Henry finally found his voice, low and shaken. That's not what happened. Todd lifted a hand slightly toward Henry. Not now, he said, cutting it off without aggression. The room was tense, everyone trying to understand what had just been said, but Todd kept his focus on Will so things didn't spiral further. Whatever you're feeling right now, Todd continued gently, we're going to talk about it properly, but not like this, not as a shock drop in the middle of everyone. A pause. You're not in trouble, but we need to slow everything down before anyone says something they can't take back. The room stayed frozen in that uneasy pause where emotion, confusion, and reality all collided at once, and nobody quite knew what the truth actually was yet. The room finally went quiet in a different way, less like tension, more like exhaustion settling in. Will typed on his tablet slower now. I'm done, Dad, help me in bit. Todd immediately softened his expression. He didn't react to the earlier argument anymore, he just focused on what Will needed right now. All right, Todd said gently, we're done for tonight. He turned slightly toward the others, without getting pulled back into the debate. Leave it, it's over for today. Henry stayed quiet, still unsettled, but he didn't speak. Bate and Rachel both held back, watching but not escalating further. David didn't interrupt either, just observing the shift back to care and routine. Todd moved closer to Will, voice steady and calm. Yeah, I've got you, let's get you upstairs. He carefully guided Will away from the room, lowering the intensity of everything around him just by slowing the pace. No more talking tonight, Todd added quietly, just rest. And with that, the focus shifted away from conflict and back to the simple, practical moment, getting Will safe, settled, and out of the noise. Will paused at the bottom of the stairs, tablet in his hands, breathing unevenly from the long day. He typed, I feel like I'm breaking out of my cage. Todd immediately stopped moving. His tone changed, still calm but much more alert. You're not joking, Todd asked quietly. Will shook his head slightly and typed again. Stuff like that isn't something to joke about. That made Todd focus fully on him. Okay, Todd said gently, I hear you. He stepped a little closer, lowering his voice so it didn't carry into the rest of the house. When you say cage, do you mean overwhelmed, trapped, or like you need space from everything happening today? He wasn't accusing, just trying to understand what was underneath the words. Henry stood a few steps behind, watching quietly, sensing the shift in tone. Todd continued carefully. You've had a funeral, a lot of conflict, and a lot of heavy conversations. Your brain's probably still in overload. A pause. But I need to know, are you safe right now? The room wasn't tense anymore in a confrontational way, it was serious now, focused, grounded on making sure Will was okay before anything else mattered. Will was now lying in bed, the tablet resting against his chest as his fingers moved more slowly, more heavily. He typed, My relationship with Tom ended because his dad won't accept him because he is the son of a pastor and I'm done living a lie. Tom lied to everyone, I am done lying to myself. Todd stayed by the doorway for a moment instead of immediately responding. His voice came out calm but more careful now. Will, I hear how strong those feelings are right now. He stepped a little closer, not crowding the bed. But I need to be really clear with you, this is a lot of big conclusions all at once, and I don't think you're in the best place tonight to sort what's fact, what's emotion and what might be confusion from everything that happened today. A pause. You've had shock, grief, arguments, and a funeral. Your mind is trying to make sense of it all at once. He softened his tone. You are not living a lie, you're overwhelmed. Henry stood quietly near the hall, not interrupting, just listening. Todd continued gently. We can talk about your feelings about Tom, your memories, and what you're carrying, but not by locking it into one final story tonight. He looked at Will with steady concern. Right now, the goal is simple, you rest. No more big decisions about relationships, truth, or the past tonight. A beat. And tomorrow, we go through it properly, piece by piece, so it doesn't overwhelm you like this again. The room stayed quiet after that, less like an argument, more like a pause button being pressed on something too heavy to untangle in one night. The room was dim now, the kind of quiet that only comes after everything has been said and nothing more needs to be said out loud. Will lay under the covers, tablet still in his hands. His breathing had finally slowed, but his chest still felt tight in that way grief doesn't let go of quickly. Todd had checked on him, made sure he was settled, then stepped out of the room to give him space. The door stayed slightly open, just enough to be there if needed, but not enough to feel watched. For a few minutes there was nothing but silence. Then Will's shoulders shook. Quiet at first. Then again. He pressed his face slightly into the pillow, trying not to make it louder, but it came anyway, small, broken sobs he didn't try to stop anymore. His fingers moved slowly across the tablet screen. I miss you, Tom. He didn't press send, he didn't delete it either. Just left it there. Unfinished, real, unsorted. Outside the room, Todd didn't rush back in. He stayed where he was, letting the moment exist without interrupting it, knowing that sometimes the only thing someone can do in grief is let the feeling pass through without being told to fix it. Inside the bed, Will stayed still after typing it, like the words had taken just enough weight out of him to breathe again, but not enough to make the hurt disappear. And for now, that was all it needed to be. The next morning, the house felt unusually quiet. No TV, no joking from Henry, no music from the kitchen. Just tension sitting in the air from everything the night before had dragged into the open. Will rolled into the living room holding his phone instead of his tablet this time. Todd looked up first. Bate was nearby, folding laundry while Henry sat slouched on the couch. Will typed quickly and turned the screen toward them. Don't ask, just please watch. Todd immediately noticed how serious he looked. Okay, Todd said quietly. Will handed over the phone. Then he left the room before anyone could stop him. Henry frowned. That's never good. Todd pressed play. The video was shaky, probably recorded secretly or in the middle of an argument. The camera pointed mostly downward, catching pieces of a bedroom floor and part of someone's arm. Then Will's electronic voice came through from his device in the recording. I done keep lying to our families. Tom, I love the fighting was cute at first in front of our parents. But now. A long pause followed. Then Tom answered, voice strained and frustrated. You don't understand. Will's device answered immediately. I do. Next time you see your family, tell them, or it's done between us. Silence in the living room. On the recording, Tom sounded panicked now. What about you? Will's device replied one last time. I will tell them with you or without you. The video ended abruptly. Nobody in the room moved for a few seconds after it stopped. Henry stared straight ahead. Oh. Bate slowly lowered the shirt she'd been folding. Todd stayed very still, phone still in his hand, replaying pieces of the conversation in his head, not just the words but the emotion underneath them. Not manipulation. Not a joke. An argument between two people hiding something they were tired of hiding. Henry finally looked toward the hallway where Will had disappeared. He was telling the truth, Henry said quietly. Todd exhaled slowly through his nose. Looks like he was. Will slowly came back into the living room, his phone tucked against his chest like he regretted leaving it there at all. Nobody spoke immediately. The silence felt different now, not disbelief, not argument, just people trying to absorb what they had seen. Will typed carefully on his tablet this time. You believe me now. He looked toward Todd first, not angry anymore, just tired, vulnerable. Todd answered before anyone else could. Yes, he said quietly. The word landed heavily. I believe that what you showed us was real. Will's shoulders loosened just slightly. Bate looked emotional now, still processing the fact that there had been an entire hidden relationship happening underneath years of tension and conflict. Henry rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. That video kinda answered everything, Henry admitted. Todd stood up slowly and handed the phone back to Will. But listen to me carefully, Todd said gently. Believing you doesn't mean I think this was easy or healthy or simple for either of you. Will looked down. Todd continued. It means I understand now why yesterday hit you so hard. The room stayed quiet. Not because people had nothing to say anymore, but because the truth had finally entered the room and everybody knew things were going to feel different after this. Will typed one more sentence, hands shaking harder now. That was why I didn't want to see him that night at the hospital. Before anyone could answer, he threw the tablet onto the sofa. It landed against the cushions with a dull smack. Then Will broke. Not angry this time. Just devastated. He bent forward in his chair and started sobbing openly, years of grief, guilt, love, resentment, and exhaustion finally crashing together all at once. Bate covered her mouth slightly, startled by how raw it was. Henry looked frozen, unsure what to do now that everything had become real in front of them. Todd moved immediately. He crouched beside Will instead of talking over him, one hand resting carefully against his shoulder. You don't have to hold it in anymore, Todd said quietly. Will cried harder at that, the kind of crying that comes from finally saying something out loud after carrying it alone too long. Todd stayed steady beside him. No wonder you couldn't go in, he continued softly. Seeing him then would have meant facing all of this before you were ready. Will tried to catch his breath but couldn't stop shaking. Behind them nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. For once, there was no debating whether his feelings were real. The room simply let him grieve. Will was still shaking when he finally forced the words out between sobs, voice cracked and broken. I hate him for doing that to me. The sentence didn't come out clean, it came out messy like everything else he'd been holding in. Todd didn't correct him or argue with it. He stayed crouched beside Will, steady and present. I hear you, Todd said quietly, that anger makes sense. A pause. You can feel that and still be grieving him at the same time. Will's breathing hitched again, like he didn't know what to do with both feelings existing together. Bate looked uneasy but stayed silent. Henry stood back watching without interrupting. Todd kept his voice calm and grounded. What happened between you two mattered to you, and when something matters and it hurts, you don't just lose the person, you lose the version of it you wished it could have been too. Will wiped his face roughly with his sleeve, still shaking. Todd didn't rush him. You don't have to decide today what he was to you in the end, he added. You just have to get through this moment. The room stayed quiet around them, not trying to fix it anymore, just letting Will feel it without being alone in it. The room was still heavy from everything that had just happened. Will was still sitting where he had cried, breathing uneven, eyes red. Todd stayed close but quiet, giving him space without leaving. That's when the front door opened again. Pat walked in with David behind him. They paused for a second, taking in the atmosphere without needing anyone to explain it. Pat's voice was firm, tired. It's time we leave. No one in the room immediately argued. Bate glanced over and nodded slightly. That is a great idea. The words landed flat, like everyone had already reached the limit of what they could handle today. Henry stayed quiet, watching Will instead of the adults now. Todd didn't object, he just looked toward Will, checking him first before anything else. Will, he said gently, giving him control of the moment. The decision didn't feel dramatic anymore, no more arguments, no more interruptions. Just a group of people who had reached the edge of what they could process in one day, waiting to see if Will was ready to let the moment end, or if something still needed to be said before they all walked away from it. David stepped forward, voice tight and shaken. Will, delete my number until you stop living in this and stop making up lies about Tom. He's dead, what's wrong with you? The words hit the room hard. Will froze for a moment, still raw from everything earlier in the day. His face tightened like he was trying to hold himself together, but it wasn't working anymore. Todd stepped in immediately, voice firm but controlled. "David, stop, that's not helping." He moved slightly between them, not blocking but creating space. "Everyone is overloaded, no one is thinking clearly right now." Bate looked uncomfortable, glancing between David and Will. Henry shifted forward a little, uneasy, clearly wanting to say something but holding back. Todd kept his attention on Will now, softening his tone again. "Will, don't respond to that right now, just breathe." The room stayed tense but contained. Not because the conflict was resolved, but because Todd was actively trying to stop it from escalating any further while Will was still emotionally raw. And in that moment, the focus wasn't on proving anyone right or wrong anymore. It was just about keeping everything from breaking apart completely. David's voice rose again, sharp with frustration. "Tom wasn't gay, you're a fucking liar, Will, stop lying about Tom." The room snapped tight again. Todd immediately stepped in, voice firm and controlled. "David, enough, that's not acceptable." He raised a hand slightly, stopping the situation from spiraling further. "This is exactly why we are not doing this conversation like this, in this room today." Will stood there frozen, already overwhelmed from everything earlier. His face showed distress, not defiance, like he couldn't process another attack on what he believed. Henry looked stunned, quietly saying, "This is getting out of hand." Bate looked torn, clearly uncomfortable with how far it had gone. Todd shifted fully into de-escalation mode. "Everyone stop right now." A pause. "We are not resolving Tom's life, identity, or relationships in a shouting match, not today." He turned slightly toward Will, voice softening. "Will, you don't have to defend anything right now, just step back with me for a minute." Then, still calm but firm, Todd added, "And David, you're done speaking on this for now." The room stayed tense but contained again, held together by boundaries instead of argument. The shouting didn't fade, it just hit a breaking point. Will couldn't take any more of it. He didn't grab his phone, he didn't take his tablet. He just turned his power chair and left. The wheels hummed loudly across the floor as he moved toward the door, tears already on his face. "Will, wait," Todd called, moving after him immediately. But Will was already gone through the doorway. The cold air outside hit him instantly. The noise of the house disappeared behind him, replaced by the open street and the steady sound of his chair rolling forward. He didn't know where he was going yet. He just needed distance. Behind him, voices from inside the house were still trying to settle, but Will couldn't hear them anymore. All he could hear was his own breathing and the uneven rhythm of wheels on pavement. Henry came out a moment later, looking panicked. "Will." Todd followed, slower but focused, staying calm so he didn't make things worse. "Okay," Todd said gently to himself as much as anyone else. "We just keep him safe, that's the priority." Will kept moving forward, tears still coming, not looking back, just trying to get away from everything that had become too loud to hold inside one room. 5 hours had passed. The house wasn't loud anymore. It was worse than that, quiet in a way that felt wrong. Bate kept checking the window. Henry had stopped packing only because he was too tired to keep going. David sat stiffly, phone in his hand but not using it. Even Pat had lost his earlier certainty. Rachel looked increasingly worried, speaking quietly to herself more than anyone else. No phone, no tablet in his chair, he just went. The words kept repeating in different heads, each time sounding worse. Todd had already been out searching once and came back in briefly, rain on his jacket, face more serious now. "He's not at any of the usual places," Todd said. "I'm going back out." Henry stood up immediately. "I'm coming." Todd nodded once. "Stay close, don't split up." Bate grabbed her coat too. "I'm not staying here." David didn't argue anymore, just followed, guilt and worry mixing together now. Outside, the streetlights were coming on. The neighborhood felt too big all of a sudden, like it had swallowed one person and refused to give him back. Todd led the way, scanning every corner, every curb cut, every familiar route Will usually took. "Will," Henry called out into the night. No answer. Just wind, distance, and time that kept moving even though nobody else wanted it to. And for the first time that day, everyone understood the same thing at once. This wasn't just an argument anymore. It was a search. A police officer slowed the patrol car near the curb, rolling down the window as he spotted a man clearly distressed on the sidewalk. Todd stepped forward quickly. "Officer, we're looking for someone. Will. He's in a power chair. He left the house hours ago without his phone or tablet." The officer's expression shifted immediately to alert. "Okay, when was he last seen?" "About 5 hours ago," Todd said. "He was very upset after a confrontation at home. We've been searching the area." Henry added, anxious. He wouldn't just disappear like this. Something really set him off. The officer nodded and spoke into his radio. "We've got a vulnerable missing adult wheelchair user last seen 5 hours ago. Starting local search and requesting units check parks, main routes and transit stops." Bates stood behind them, hands shaking. David looked down, guilt written all over his face now that the argument from earlier didn't matter anymore. The officer looked back at Todd. "Do you know any places he goes when he's overwhelmed?" Todd thought for a second, already turning that question into a plan. "Yes," he said, "I do." He looked at Henry. "We start with the quiet places, the ones where he can stop the noise." And together they moved, no arguing now, no sides, just urgency, searching the night for Will. Bate quickly pulled out her phone, hands shaking as she tried to think clearly. She called Todd. When he answered, her voice came out rushed. "Todd, he's at the group home. I think he's at the group home looking at Tom's memorial." There was a short pause on the other end. Todd's tone immediately sharpened with focus. "Are you sure?" "I don't know for certain," Bate admitted, breath shaky, "but it's the only place I can think of where he'd go when he's overwhelmed." Todd didn't hesitate. "Okay, stay where you are, I'm going there now." He ended the call and turned to Henry and the others. "We check the group home memorial space, now." Henry straightened immediately. "I'm coming." David nodded too, guilt and worry now fully replacing the anger from earlier. As they moved, the urgency changed the air completely. No more arguments, no more accusations. Just one goal now. Find Will before the night got any longer. The search lights from the patrol car swept across the quiet area near the group home's memorial space. Todd stepped forward first, slowing as he spotted the familiar shape of a power chair near the edge of the walkway. He stopped breathing for a second. "I see him," Todd said, voice low but immediate. Henry rushed up beside him, following his gaze. "Is that him?" the officer asked, moving closer. Todd nodded once. "Yes." There was no hesitation in his voice now, just relief mixed with urgency. The officer immediately keyed his radio. "Subject located, he's safe." But Todd was already moving forward, not rushing in, just approaching carefully so he didn't startle him. Near the memorial area, Will was there in his power chair, still, facing the space quietly. The emotional storm from earlier had settled into exhaustion, like his body had simply run out of energy to fight or run anymore. Henry let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "He's there," Henry said quietly. Todd slowed as he got closer, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Hey Will, it's me." The officer stayed a few steps back, giving space. This wasn't a chase anymore. It was just about getting him safely back from the place he came to when everything felt too heavy to carry alone. Will took the tablet back from Todd with shaking hands. His breathing was uneven, like he was trying to steady himself but couldn't quite get there. He typed slowly. "I needed space. David called me a liar. I needed spaxiform everyone, sorry." The moment he finished, it broke again. Will's shoulders dropped and he started sobbing hard, uncontrolled, deep, the kind that comes when the body finally stops holding everything in. Todd didn't interrupt the crying. He stayed close, steady beside him, making sure he didn't feel alone in it. "I hear you," Todd said quietly. "You needed space, that makes sense." Behind them, the officer stayed a few steps back, no longer intervening, just confirming Will was safe. Henry stood nearby, visibly shaken, watching but not pushing in. Todd kept his voice calm and grounded. "You're not in trouble for needing space, Will, but when you leave like that we get scared because we don't know if you're safe." Will kept crying, gripping the tablet tightly like it was the only thing keeping him anchored. Todd softened his tone further. "We're going to take this one step at a time now. No arguments, no accusations, just getting you back home and settled. The world around them stayed still for a moment, no shouting anymore, no conflict. Just breathing, crying, and someone finally being found. Will was still crying when he tried to type again, hands shaking. I need a chain. Todd immediately understood this as him needing practical support and a reset after hours outside. Okay, Todd said gently, we'll sort that. He didn't question it further or make it bigger than it needed to be. You're safe now, that's what matters. Henry stayed nearby, still shaken but relieved Will had been found. The officer stepped back, confirming the situation was stable. Todd lowered his voice to Will. We're going to head home, get you cleaned up, warm and settled. No more arguing today, no more pressure. He paused. You did the right thing letting us find you. Will was still sobbing, but now he wasn't alone in it. And slowly, the moment shifted from crisis back into care. They made it back home just after the search. The house was still lit but quieter now, like everyone had been waiting without knowing what to do with themselves. Todd guided Will inside first, staying close but not crowding him. Will's breathing was still uneven, eyes red from crying, but he was no longer alone outside in the dark. Henry followed behind, exhausted, glancing around like he still couldn't fully believe the last few hours had happened. Inside the living room, the others looked up immediately. No one spoke right away. Bates stood up slowly, David didn't say anything, Rachel stayed quiet, watching carefully. Todd broke the silence first, calm but firm. He's home. That was all he said for a moment. Then he added softer. We're not doing any more arguments tonight, no accusations, no revisiting what just happened, he needs to settle. Will stayed near the doorway for a second, gripping his tablet, still shaken but present. The room didn't explode like before. It just paused. Not fixed. Not resolved. Just held still long enough for Will to come back inside and not be lost in the night anymore. Will stood in the doorway, still drained from everything that had happened. His hands shook slightly as he typed on his tablet. I want to get clean in bed. Then no food, just bed. Todd nodded right away, keeping his voice calm and simple. Okay, we can do that. He didn't push, didn't argue, just adjusted to what Will could manage right now. Shower or wash up, then straight to bed, no pressure. Henry stayed back in the hallway, quiet, watching Will with concern but not interrupting. From the living room, the tension had mostly settled into exhaustion. No one was continuing the earlier arguments anymore. Todd gently gestured toward the stairs. I'll stay with you while you get sorted, he said, step by step. He paused for a moment, then added more softly. You've had more than enough for one day, we're keeping the rest simple now. And for the first time since everything started falling apart, the focus shifted away from conflict, and toward just getting Will safe, clean, and finally able to rest.